Hello, dear sippers, payment geeks, and everything in between. I'm really happy and excited to welcome you for this very first episode of T for Two and Two for T, my podcast. The objective of this podcast is pretty crystal clear: interviewing people and getting their views on what shapes the payment industry, catching all the T's and offering them to you, dear sippers. Different perspective, far from the marketing sponsorship and the vanity noise. As many of you already know, Spill the Tea on Payment is my platform on payments industry where I share opinions, education, inspiration, and a bit of debunking. It's 100% independent and with a bit of humor and fantasy. I'm Jordan Grayson, your good payment friend in this industry, and you can guess by my lovely accent I'm French. It's always good to know. I was very honored to be in Lausanne, Switzerland to welcome my first guest. She accepted the challenge of this first episode, and trust me, it was not easy. I'm grateful to have received Vassilina Walford. Vassilina made part of her career as a treasurer in one of the biggest luxury groups in the world, Richemont. Then became the head, the eyes, and the ends for the retail payments in this prestigious group. Richemont, this is 20 businesses in several luxury verticals, including Cartier, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Chloé, more than 2,000 mono-brand shops. It's a very big luxury beast. Vassilina is now the happy founder and owner of Payment Vibes, her boutique consulting dedicated to retailers, and also a director at the Payment Consulting Network. What's interesting about Vassilina is that she sees payment with two hats, which contradicts a bit the narrative of the industry. Let me explain. Payments industry is acceptance focused, front-end focused. And Vassilina comes from a back office function in charge of financials and talking about the cash, the big figures, and the money entering. And payment experts are seldom from the user's side. A lot of experts are from the payment industry and have worked with merchants, but have never experienced working for one of them. So, what does it look like to be at the core of a reactor in one of the biggest dream machines? This is what we are going to find out with Vassilina. In this episode, we talked about her treasury background and how it shaped her views, the multi-acquiring tactic pushed by all payment strategists. Is it good or not? The emergence of the chief payment officer role, the relationship between luxury and payment, and the shift currently happening. And finally, the omnichannel promise. And also, of course, throughout this episode, her visions on payment and retail. We see quite a packed and tight schedule, but you will see, it's going to be fun. Allez, let's go. Let's spill the tea. Tea for two. And two for tea. Hosted by Jordan Grayson. Episode 1. Lina, you're quite a specimen in the big payment zoo, veteran in the luxury sector. You worked 15 years there, and then 180 degrees, you created your expertise in payment vibe last year. How did you end up in this direction? What was the main driver for you?
Hi, Jordan, first of all. And thank you very much for inviting me to this, your first inaugural podcast.
My pleasure.
Well, you know, I ended up in the payments a little bit by accident, and as I think many of us, it's the case for many of us. I'm a treasurer by profession, so I'm a qualified treasurer. And as you mentioned, I worked in a multinational environment where basically I was responsible for different treasury activities, risk management activities. Mm-hmm. And once my boss asked me, can you have a look at the credit card fees because we are paying quite a lot, and we are now opening more and more boutiques,
Uh-huh.
and the fees are really going up, and would be good to understand why. So that's how I started to look into the payments. So I kind of entered that space with a kind of treasury casket, really looking at the fees, etc.
I was about to come on that, but we will talk about that later.
But that's basically how I entered the payment space, really
Okay.
from the treasury door, if I can call it like this.
Okay, and how your experience in treasury shaped your view on payments? Like, what was like, because a lot of people enters in the payment industry, by not by this, treasury aspect, but much more on the tech side, on the acceptance side. So, what do you feel has been a plus or something different in the fact that you were coming from treasury?
Well, I think actually it's not many people are. I mean, depending who you are looking at. If you are looking more kind of the companies, merchants, payments are still under the legacy of treasury or finance teams quite a lot. But it's true that once you enter that space and you really start to speak to different providers, etc., it's true that it's quite tech driven,
Yeah.
centered. But I wouldn't say that it's really an exception to be a treasurer where you start, because in the past the payments were really managed by the banks.
Yeah, and this is what caught my interest, and this is why I ask you this question actually. Okay.
Exactly. So I don't think it's that different from the merchant perspective to come from treasury. But it's true that now when I speak to people and people are seeing me coming from treasury, they always ask, how is it possible? Because it's true that now the world of payments changed quite a lot compared to, let's say, even 8 years ago.
Okay. You said in an interview in The Circle, which is a remarkable initiative in France to shed a bit of light in France and a bit in Europe, because you are from The Circle and you're based in Switzerland. But you started your journey in the payment, and you just mentioned it just before, by looking at the cost, and this is apparently what your boss asked you. How important was it for you at that time? Like, are businesses really conscious about what they pay on the merchant side from a payment point of view?
Well, I think yes, because obviously in the luxury industry, the average value of transactions are quite high, and credit card commissions are percentage based, so it's becoming very expensive. But also, when I started to look into that, what I very quickly realized is that there is the credit card commissions, but also at that time, you had so many different providers taking a cut, and it was
The
very
middleman.
difficult. Exactly. So you kind of saw like the headline number, which was already quite big, but really to understand who you are paying for what was quite difficult actually.
Yeah, because there is not a lot of transparency in the industry in the way that, like, how you can understand your credit card statement when they come on the table is always a bit difficult.
Yes.
And yeah, so this
But
lack
also,
of transparency.
when I started, it was really the Interchange Plus Plus was at its kind of beginning. You know, it was really blended.
And it's not the case everywhere in the world. Like, if you because you work in the luxury sector, so quickly it becomes cross-border. So we don't talk only about Europe, but it can be in the US, in Canada, or in Asia.
Yeah, I think it was definitely an eye-opening exercise for many things. First of all, to understand the fees you pay, but also because it was all blended, you actually didn't know who your providers are really behind. You just saw your main banks, but behind the scenes there were so many different providers. And by actually zooming on these fees and trying to really understand, breaking them down, who you are paying for what, not only kind of generated the financial savings, but also pushed us to think what are the processes behind.
Yeah. What value do you have for your money?
Exactly. And when there is a problem with the service, you kind of understood why it was taking so long to fix it, because you had no clue who was behind the main bank, So it actually uh, helped us to really not only generate financial savings by really reviewing the fees, but also to put the spotlight on all the different
Yeah, and have a
inefficiencies in the
holistic
terms of
views of
exactly,
what's happening and the what I call the matryoshka effect, which is like
exactly,
you open and you open another door and you see again and again
exactly,
new
exactly.
intermediate and middlemen, and this is kind of a bit of the specificity of the payment industry, but I would say much more the card payment industry, because if you go on some non-card based payment methods, you don't have this effect of Matryoshka where you open the door and you find another one. But yeah, I perfectly understand what you are saying. I was a bit, also curious because you have a lot of payment strategists, that says that multi-acquiring is something. Like if you arrive somewhere and you want to, let's say, change the process, you have to do the multi-acquiring, which is, for those who are listening right now, the fact that you can start having not only one acquirer, but multiple acquirer, not only in multiple countries, but also in one country. You can choose to say, okay, I'm just going to go with multiple acquirers to be sure that if they are put in competition, potentially I will get better price. What's your takeaway on this subject?
Well,
Have you? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to talk
yeah,
about what happened,
no, no, no.
in your former job. But when I'm talking about takeaway, is much more okay. What's your experience? How did you view that? What's your view on it?
I think it's quite I would say a complicated question, and for me, I think the way I see it is that it's all a question of balance. You know, I think having too many providers is not great. Having one or two providers is not good as well because
Yeah.
you have the dependency. But if you have too many, well, you have the flexibility, but it becomes super complex, all the integrations, etc. I think it's also a question of strategic kind of approach. I mean, payments is not only about costs.
Yeah.
It's also about the partners with who you really want to well, who you are kind of confident enough that they will help you to grow. And
Yeah.
especially for the companies who are entering either new markets or new channels, you really need to have a partner who can support you on that. But what I was trying to say in terms of the multi-acquiring versus kind of single acquiring strategy, I think for me it's really about balancing many different aspects, and it's not only about cost, but it's more strategic. My personal strategy is that you need to have a relatively small selective group of several acquirers. It shall not be too big, but it shall not be too lean,
Yeah.
because you are really exposed. Then you have really an exposure, and I think then you also
And that's something from Treasury, actually.
exactly
Because
that's kind
in
of
Treasury,
exactly.
you always have this view of creating a redundancy in your bank account. You don't always put always your eggs in the same basket.
It's really coming from the kind of treasury banking background when we always say, the banks, if you don't have the strategic kind of relationship, the banks who are approaching you with the lending, it's very common when you don't need the lending. But when you do need the lending, that's when you realize who are your real partners. And it's a little bit the same on the payment side. When you have strategic partners, it's not only when everything is good and everything is growing, but it's also when you have, like, for example, when we had COVID, I mean, that's a very good example. When all the boutiques were closed, everything was closed, everyone was panicking. And that's when you really understand who
that you have a partner.
partners.
Yeah. Let's talk about treasurer and finance. So we just kind of just talk about their role, but I wanted to know more. I mean, having your feeling, because I worked with, treasury and finance in my past life. And I've always feel that those people are the most impacted, by the strategy and, the decision that are taking in the payment, but always the least consulted. So they always come at the end, like a decision is taken and payment is always the last to know, actually. So they are never like leading, the change, but much more like getting the change at the end, especially now, is it a fact or I mean, is it real or is it like something that I've invented? You know?
No, I think it's true. I mean, I think payments is quite often under the legacy of treasury slash finance, but it's true that in terms of the a lot of the decision making, especially everything which concerns kind of customer facing or commercial
Yeah.
or branded experiences, it's true that it's not really the kind of the territory of treasury.
So there is like a sort of shift as what it used to be. So this is why you have this impression of getting the last one informed. Actually,
I think things are definitely changing now.
Yeah.
Compared to when I started to look into that.
Okay.
When I started to look into that, it was really a payment or kind of payment processing was considered like a cost of doing business. And the primary focus was really on efficiency, on cost. That's how I entered there. On the kind of automation of the processes, on the
Yep.
back office aspects. But it's true that, and I think that's where we see quite a big change in many companies, especially in the luxury space. I think it's really the case because the experience, the
Is
customer
important.
experience is very important. And when you spend a lot of efforts in terms of the product development, in terms of the
And money,
marketing,
like not only effort but also money.
And you get to the checkout, and it can be checkout on e-commerce or in boutique, and you have a kind of not great payment experience. Well, all the efforts before are spoiled. It's basically not great.
Yeah, and if you lost a customer in the luxury, it's very difficult to get it back because if they are disappointed by the experience,
exactly,
then they will never come back. So
exactly. So I think that's when the payments kind of the role of people who own the payments topic in the company is changing. So they are maybe a bit more consulted, but I think the role of payment is, and I think probably I'm anticipating one of your next questions because it's so multifaceted. It's not finance has its role to play, technology has its role to play, operations has its role to play, brand marketing has their role to play, and it's actually an orchestration of all that. For me, that's what payments is often about, is about this kind of multifaceted view of different impacts.
You made the perfect transition for me. I was about to ask about, and talk about what is emerging. And I know it's something close to your professional heart or your heart of expertise is the ascension of the chief payment officer role. So according to what makes a good chief payment officer?
Well, I don't know what makes a good chief payment officer. And I think for me, we use a lot chief payment officer, but I think it's a title. It can be anything. It can be...
you're spilling the tea!
No, but I think my
understand.
main message is that... I think one of my main messages is... Actually, I have two. One is because of this multifaceted nature of payments, if you put payment or head of payment or chief payment or, well, no, let's forget about chief payment officer, but somebody responsible for payment in a function, you automatically create a bias of that function.
Yeah.
So if it's in finance, it's more control, it's more bottom line, it's more efficiency, etc. That's the bias. So they are less open and less ready sometimes to take even a risk, to try something in a new market because the return on investment is not there, etc., etc., etc. If you put that in, and I've seen that in the kind of brand commercial teams, well, that's a little bit the opposite. It's really about top line. It's really
taking risk,
etc. They are conscious, of course, about the bottom line, but not as a finance. So there is another bias. If you put it in IT or technology, which happens quite a lot, well, you have completely different bias. You have speed of integration. simplicity, of integration.
Yeah, is it like a good API to work with? And therefore the question of customer experience or cost doesn't come into account.
Exactly. So I think you basically create, and that's one of my messages, is that in order to kind of get rid of these biases, my view is that it shall be a dedicated function. And then how you call that, it's another question. And why chief payment officer? It's just to say that this function, this dedicated role, shall be senior enough.
Yeah.
That's why I kind of call it chief.
This is why it's a chief and officer.
Exactly, because I think one of the problems is that this person shall be, of course, be able to speak to teams everywhere, but this person needs also to be able to manage the C-level, which is often C4, COO, who are quite involved in these questions because it's commercial operations. And you know, if you don't have enough seniority, it's very difficult to basically get buy-in first, to explain, to have a seat at the table.
Like, you know, this question of chief payment officer, and the risk is like you get into your tower and you feel completely cut from operations because you get seniority, you get the role, you get the responsibility. And the more you go on the hierarchy, the less you are connected with the field, what is happening. And I'm biased, or I don't know. I mean, I'm wrong, but I feel like payments is also a question of being in the field, like having the operations, you know. But if you are too high in the hierarchy, are you really connected to the field? Like, you know, I know it's.
I think it's. Well, I think the question is you can ask that. You can say that for any C level.
Okay.
You know,
Fair
CFO. You can be a CFO who sits in a tower, or you can be CFO who goes on the ground and visits the markets, your operations, etc. The same for CEO. For me, definitely payments is something which you really need to be in the markets.
Yeah,
you
on
need
the field.
You really need to understand. And not only from the sales ambassador's perspective, you need to visit the call centers. You need to visit the back office teams because, you know, there is a lot of debates between, you know, there is it's good to innovate and put new solutions in place. But if you don't think back office at the same time, you know, it's very difficult to scale.
And also the question of scalability, but also, it's like you need to sell it. Like you need to sell it to people that will use the solution. I mean, I've been in organization where they struggle to deploy new solution because they didn't sell it to the team. Because ultimately, you know, the chief payment officer is not going to be the one that set up the terminal or take care of the chargeback. So if you don't sell this, you don't train like appropriately the people. And again, if you don't sell this to the team and they don't buy it, it's not going to work.
Exactly. And I think that's a little bit the challenge of this role, as probably the case for many transversal roles, is that you have to sell to so diverse audience and really not only find the message, because it's easy to find the message, but implement the message as well. You know,
I want to talk now more about the luxury retail, because it's where you come from. So I'm a bit, you know, interested and curious to hear more about that. You talked in one of your LinkedIn posts, I read, on the Chinese winter and the Indian summer. And I really like the image. And it made me think, okay, so how can luxury industry and retail luxury industry can use the payment as a strategic tool to help? Because obviously, if you want to have a good Indian summer, you need to think about what you're going to do from a payment perspective, you know?
Yes.
So,
well, I think it's quite, I would say, complicated, not complicated, I don't know, but it's not an easy question, because when I wrote that post, I remember, because, you know, India is quite an interesting market for luxury brands, but it was a very difficult market to enter, but not for payment reasons, for different other reasons.
And also for payment reasons, I can assure you.
I think it's definitely when you enter a market like this, like either India or China or any market, basically. Um, Definitely, what you need to be able to do is offer the payments that the local clientele is used to, you know.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it's quite a challenge, you know. I still remember when we started to implement Alipay, it was so new for everyone, you know. We didn't really understand how it works, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. I mean, it was a few years ago, so
And
but
now we have a little bit more understand of the solution. But yeah, it's true. Like 5 or 6 years ago, when Alipay arrived on the European market and start selling their solution to European brands and Maison, and it was something super new. Like it's not a card payment, so it kind of
yes,
shifted their mind. And it's interesting you are talking about Alipay because I think it's kind of
clear.
luxury retail get conscious that payment, sorry, is an enabler, and I think they can thank the Chinese for that.
No, it's definitely, and I think it's definitely an enabler. And I think as you mentioned, the WeChat and Alipay examples are a good ones where payment is not anymore about again processing. You know,
Yeah,
it's a lifestyle.
app. This
It's
is
a
how
lifestyle
they market
app,
and brand it.
exactly,
Yeah,
where everything is in one kind of environment. And it's definitely something which is very important to understand when you enter a new market. In India, it's something it's different, but it's definitely payment is an enabler when you enter new market. So you can either take it as again just process the payment
and get your money.
and done, or you really embrace the local specificities, local preferences of the consumers, which is now, especially in all these relatively new markets, if you think from kind of old Europe perspective, you
Yeah,
know, when we are, they have
the
completely
emerging
different
markets,
way
emerging
of
economies. Yeah,
exactly of paying and using these payment apps than
yeah,
we have in Europe. So it's very important to understand that, and it's definitely opens a lot of opportunities in that market.
yeah.
So it's definitely an enabler. Payment is an enabler. It can be a very simple enabler, or it can be a kind of full scope, you know, taking the advantages of many opportunities.
Yeah. And do you think like there is a sort of it used to be potentially because if what we are talking now is like we see payment as an enabler, but in the luxury, I got the feeling that for a moment it's not like payment was a taboo, but it was not considered like so as. And do you think that there is like this taboo has disappeared or?
I think it's well. I'm not sure if it's disappeared, but it's true that you know, for luxury goods, you know, I think luxury brands are changing the
Okay.
way I see it. And it's true that I remember times when you know, offering buy now pay later would be,
For example, yeah.
for example, kind of implicitly means that we are not attracting
The right
the
customer.
right customer base. But I think there was such a shift in the customer base
Yeah.
of luxury, you know.
That's true. Like there
Yeah.
is a real shift in the and I was talking about that with someone I know, and I think you will recognize in this. I was saying that now the main driver of the luxury retail industry is the Gen Z,
Yes, it's Millennium and Gen Z, exactly.
and we don't buy luxury product as how our parents were buying. I'm a millennial, and and we don't buy luxury product as the same way as our parents.
But one of the taboo, well, it's kind of related to payments, but not 100% payment, is that the most famous one is that we don't sell luxury online.
Yeah, I was
And
about to
now,
come on that.
okay, sorry.
That's no, but that's cool. Like you made a good transition, because yeah, I wanted to talk more about the unified commerce. So you give me
Okay.
the perfect, transition for that. Yeah, you were saying we don't sell stuff online. And so how can you achieve this unified commerce, vision if you feel a bit reluctant to sell your stuff online?
Well, I think now it's not a taboo anymore. That's why I said it used to be a debate, quite a big debate a few years ago. But I think what we've seen, and especially, of course, as usual, COVID was a great accelerator in that, is that luxury sells very well online.
Yeah.
It's a fact of life. And I think that's when basically, if you look before COVID, after COVID, the e-commerce for luxury was relatively small.
Yeah.
After it became a very important channel.
Channel, yeah.
And now it's again, now we're talking about omni-channel, unified commerce, etc. Because basically for the consumer, and I like this phrase, somebody told me that, I don't remember who, but consumer doesn't care about omni-channel.
Yeah.
We as merchants,
Exactly.
we talk about omni-channel,
Channel,
unified commerce,
unified
etc.
commerce, the
The
whole
consumer
blah, blah,
just
blah.
want to buy, anywhere on any device, computer, mobile, etc. at any time. Exactly
And
that. I think what I meant is that for the consumer, they don't understand the concept of omnichannel. If you
Yeah.
talk to my daughter, well, now she knows because I'm talking a lot about that. But before, she doesn't understand. What she wants is just convenience. If she's on the phone, buy on phone. If she's in boutique, online,
yeah.
etc. But what it means for merchants, it's a completely different story. Because in order to offer this unified experience across all the channels in a very seamless way, you do need to have, quite a strong infrastructure, whether it's customer facing, whether it's back office
Yeah.
facing, behind.
And I think, this is something that should be taken in account. And, sometimes I don't agree with people saying, frictionless or seamless, payment experience or customer experience, because, it's the question is not about, the friction, is about how you care about the friction, because there will always be some friction. Because if you think about the tech stack that you need in order to make it, a reality, your unified commerce, of course you will have friction.
No, it's true. I mean, it's true. I think you can maybe never eliminate 100% of the frictions. I think it's really, as you say, it's try to do your best. Of course, first understand where the frictions are coming and not just, you can have a friction, but if you don't do anything after, I think it's really about also kind of identifying the friction points and do something about to remove them as you go. Never. But so I think for me, it's kind of parallel thing to do is really understand your friction and, progressively work on removing them or improving them. But friction always happen. We've just went to restaurant when there was no signal, voila. So it's more how you then handle that.
Yeah. Right. If you think about the friction, because I really like this idea, card payment is actually there are a lot of frictions when you pay by card.
But you mean by card, by physical card, or
Yeah,
just a credit card in a virtual form, for example?
Now, yeah, because you have the virtual phone, so it's getting easier. But it's still like it can be a friction, because if your card is expired,
yes,
it's in your phone and you cannot buy anymore.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's still like sometimes still bring friction, even if it's inside a wallet, in your phone.
Yeah, no, of course. But I think for me, it's a question like we just said before, you have friction everywhere anyway. So I think it's, for me, it's more the future of plastic cards, which is probably not for a long time here. The credit card, I think in whatever form, in a wallet or in a virtual form, I think it will definitely lose its importance, but I don't think it will disappear very shortly because, especially in the luxury, depending on of course, on the retail segment, but in the luxury,
it's compulsory.
It's still there, and it's still a quite significant chunk. Because also you have all the loyalty programs, you have all the insurances and all that.
And business card. A lot of people that go and buy luxury don't use a consumer card. They use commercial card. It happens a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But then I think it also depends on the countries. I still remember when I went to China and I wanted to buy coffee in Starbucks. And I said, can I pay with credit card?
They look
The
at
guy,
you
no,
and,
he went somewhere down and
and
did
take
the machine. So, I think it also depends on where you are. So
yeah.
it's in countries like China, I think credit cards,
Yeah,
they don't really exist.
yeah, because they didn't have credit
Exactly.
card.
They just
They
basically,
just make a leap and go directly to the wallet.
exactly.
And now everything is embedded in a wallet. And if you want to ask, 200 euros to Alipay, they can give it to you.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
they have everything about you. So they know everything. So if you ask for 200 euro, I mean,
Yeah.
equivalent in yuan, you can
But
get
I
it.
think that's where it becomes interesting, because when markets like China, now we see that in Africa, etc., they make these leaps and they basically bypass, the traditional
Card-centric.
legacy, etc. Then they influence the way how the traditional markets, all the apps, etc., which we have here, they have been pushed
Yeah.
through by China.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a little bit, but the mainstream came because everyone was looking at Alipay,
And
WeChat
WeChat
Pay,
Pay, yeah,
etc. So I think
that's interesting. Yeah, that's this sort of dialogue between people that are more digital advanced. Yeah, it's true. Like in the payment, in China, it's much more like advanced. So I want to talk now about some perspective in the last 15 years, and it's purely personal. How did you see the payment industry moving? Like, what was something like you feel like, okay, this is a serious shift, even if it's kind of to wrap up a bit our conversation also.
you mean next coming.
No, fast. I mean, coming back. I mean, looking back, like how was it? I mean, in the past 15 years, like many things changed in the payment industry.
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's it's 15 years. It's quite a long period. I mean, even 10 years. I think it's already quite long. Like I said, when I started, I had to learn what is interchange plus plus, because no one was really talking about interchange
Okay.
plus plus. So it was just one rate. And then, of course, what I have seen again, we spoke about that a little bit at the beginning. I'm coming from the treasury perspective. So for me, the territory of credit card, of payments, of direct-to-consumer payments, which was mainly credit card or cash at that time, or checks in France, was really the legacy of banks.
Yeah.
We don't see that anymore. I mean, what we see is that many banks, either they lost the ground,
Yeah.
or they tried to catch up. But
Yeah.
I think they lost a lot of ground. So I think it will be very difficult to catch up. But what we see now is the technology companies who became banks because they now have licenses, who took this whole territory. And
Adyen, for example.
for example, but
Yeah.
not only. And I think they did it really right, because the banks, they had so many legacy systems which they had to connect. And by having this completely new technology stack, focused on user experience, etc., that's what made the change. So that's, I say, quite a big also shift in the dynamics of who was providing, who was kind of offering the payment services, from banks to tech companies. That's definitely another big change.
And what would be, according to you, the biggest challenge that the industry must overcome in the coming 15 years?
In the
well, I mean,
15 years, I don't know. But I would say in the next 5 years, which industry? Payment industry?
Yeah, payment industry, of course. Yeah. We spilled on payment.
Well, maybe luxury industry. In terms of payment industry, I think for me, one of the challenge which I see for the acquirers, for example, especially for those who really did well in the payment space because of what I just mentioned, new technology, new
stack,
user experience approach, but I think what they basically, there is so much now competition that they need to somehow find new directions where, and what I see is that, and I think it's a very good move, is that they are moving into kind of B2B treasury space. They are kind of offering the same not same technology, but same approach in terms of user experience, new technology, etc., more to B2B treasury space, which I find quite interesting. I think there is definitely a lot of competition, in terms of all the different payment solutions, payment methods, etc. So I kind of assume there will be some sort of consolidation, because I do feel that we speak a lot about giving flexibility to the customers, etc. But I also feel that there are so many of the solutions that the customers sometimes it's almost too much.
Yeah.
So I think there will be some consolidation into that space. And in terms of next trends, I think for me, definitely, I think there is a lot of innovation in the e-commerce space.
Yeah.
You are talking about orchestration and all that. And I think it's missing in the physical store space.
So the retail store need to have their revolution.
Exactly. And I think that's also something which is coming. I read recently about, I don't remember about the company. I'm not going to pronounce, I'm not going to make the publicity. But there is some, initiatives which are bringing the kind of orchestration type into the physical stores. And I think that's, for me, will be something really interesting for the omni-channel retailers, because it's nice to have orchestration online, but if you don't have that in stores, well, you can only basically be flexible in one of your channels. So I think that's definitely something which is quite interesting.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vassilina.
Thank
it
you.
was a pleasure. Thank you.
It was nice.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
You listen T for Two and Two for T, a podcast produced, edited by Jordan Grace. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also follow my company on LinkedIn, Spill the Tea on Payment, as you probably understood. This podcast is 100% self-funded. And if you want to help, you can go to Patreon and consider a membership. What's Patreon? Patreon is a platform to help independent creators like me to keep on doing what they like the most. By getting a membership, you help me giving you more episodes. All the links will be in description. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, and see you next time. Bye-bye.